Good morning. Welcome to Grail Country. We're doing an experiment today. This is our continuing meditations on the Divine Comedy series. We are now on Canto 8 of the Inferno, and we are going to do this as a live stream so that if you want to jump in and join the discussion, you can do that. We're going to go ahead and start off as we normally do, which is by reading the poem. And Ted, it is your turn. So you're our reader
Wonderful.
today.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready to start, and then Sherry, if you want to share, do you want to share David's poem after
Sure.
Ted's
Yep.
done? Okay.
Wonderful. Returning to my theme, I say we came to the foot of a great tower, but long before we reached it through the marsh, two horns of flame flared from the summit, one from either side, and then far off, so far we scarce could see it, across the mist, another flame replied. I turned to that sea of all intelligence, saying, what is this signal and countersignal? Who is it? Who is it speaks with fire across this distance? And he then, look across the filthy slough. You may already see the one they summon if the swamp vapors do not hide him from you. No twanging bowstring ever shot an arrow that bored the air it rode, dead to the mark, more swiftly than that flying skiff whose prow shot towards us over the polluted channel, with a single steersman at the helm who called, so do I have you at last, you whelp of hell? Phlygius, Phlygius, said my lord and guide, this time you waste your breath. You have us only for the time it takes to cross to the other side. Phlygius the madman blew his rage among those muddy marshes like a cheat deceived or like a fool at some imagined wrong. My guide, whom all the fiend's noise could not nettle, boarded the skiff, motioned me to follow, and not till I stepped aboard it did it seem to settle into the water. At once we left the shore, the ancient hull riding more heavily than it had ridden in all of time before. And as we ran on that dead swamp, the slime rose before me, and from it a voice cried, who are you that come here before your time? And I replied, if I come, I do not remain, but you, who are you so fallen and so foul? And he, I am one who weeps. And I then, may you weep and wail to all eternity, for I know you, hell dog, filthy as you are. Then he stretched out hands to the boat, but warily the master shoved him back, crying, down, down with the other dogs. Then he embraced me, saying, indignant spirit, I kiss you as you frown. Blessed be she who bore you. In world and time, this one was haughtier yet. No one unbending graces his memory. Here is his shadow and slime. How many living now, chancellors of wrath, shall come to lie here yet in this pigmire, leaving a curse to be their aftermath? And I, master, it would suit my whim to see the wretch scrub down into the swill before we leave this stink and him. And he to me, before the other side shows through the mist, you shall have all you ask. This is a wish that should be gratified. And shortly after, I saw the loathsome spirit so mangled by a swarm of muddy wraiths that to this day I praise and thank God for it. After Filippo Argenti all cried together, and the mad dog Florentine wheeled at their cry and bit himself for rage. I saw them gather, and there we left him, and I say no more, but such a wailing beat upon my ears, I strained my eyes ahead to the far shore. My son, the master said, the city called Dis lies just ahead, the heavy citizens, the swarming crowds of hell's metropolis. And I then, master, I already see the glow of its red mosques, as if they came hot from the forge to smolder in this valley. And my all-knowing guide, they are eternal flues to the eternal fire that rages in them and makes them glow across the lower hell. And as he spoke, we entered the vast moat of the sepulchre. Its walls seemed made of iron and towered above us in our little boat. We circled through what seemed an endless distance before the boatman ran his prow ashore, crying, out, out, get out, this is the entrance. Above the gates, more than 1,000 shades of spirits, purged from heaven for its glory, cried angrily, who is it that invades death's kingdom in his life? My lord and guide advanced a step before me with a sign that he wished to speak to some of them aside. They quieted somewhat, and one called, come, but come alone, and tell that other one who thought to walk so blithely through death's kingdom, he may go back along the same fool's way he came by. Let him try his living luck. You who are dead can come only to stay. Reader, judge for yourself how each black word fell on my ears to sink into my heart. I lost hope of returning to the world. O my beloved master, my guide in peril, who time and time again have seen me safely along this way, and turn the power of evil. Stand by me now, I cried, in my heart's fright. And if the dead forbid our journey to them, let us go back together toward the light. My guide then, in the greatness of his spirit, take heart, nothing can take our passage from us when such a power has given warrant for it. Wait here and feed your soul while I am gone on comfort and good hope. I will not leave you to wander in this underworld alone. So the sweet guide and father leaves me here, and I stay on in doubt with yes and no, dividing all my heart to hope and fear. I could not hear my Lord's words, but the pack that gathered around him suddenly broke away, howling and jostling, and went pouring back, slamming the towering gate hard in his face. That great soul stood alone outside the wall, and then he came back. His pain showed in his pace. His eyes were fixed upon the ground, his brow sagged with its assurance. He sighed aloud, "Who has forbidden me the halls of sorrow?" And to me he said, "You need not be cast down by my vexation, for whatever plot these fiends may lay against us, we will go on. This insolence of theirs is nothing new. They showed it once at a less secret gate that still stands open for all they could do, the same gate where you read the great inscription. And through it at this moment a great one comes. Already he has passed it and moves down, ledge by dark ledge. He is one who needs no guide, and at his touch all gates must spring aside." Wow. I'm gonna go ahead and throw this one out there. I can't be I'm surprised this is the first time that I've read this part and thought, oh, this is Mordor. Like, we're at the Black Gates.
Yeah.
The iron wall, like the flaming tower that's sending signals, the marshes, all of this, the rat, basically the orcs manning the walls. It's like, oh, I'm just finishing the.
No, I think that's a reasonable. I mean, certainly that. I mean, we know that Tolkien read Dante, so it makes sense that would have made an impression on his imagination. The description of the city of Dis,
or just that there's something true about that. That like when you get close to the heart of evil, there's something about iron gates and fire and marshes and slimy marshes. There's that sort of whole vision. There's that sense of not getting out again.
Yeah. Are you going to read David's poem, Sherry?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, Sherry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got sidetracked too.
So David Russell Mosley, who's joined us for one of the episodes, has written a collection of poems where each poem is a reflection, his poetic reflection, and we found them to be very helpful. So we kind of read them before jumping into our
nice little insights from David, even though he's not here. Okay. Disordered, the city of Dis, Inferno, Canto 8. Disordered passions to disordered will give way, and for a moment I take pleasure in the tearing down of sins that kill. I approach the iron city of evil measure where rebel angels mock my wandering soul, but I must pass them by to find my treasure, and reason cannot get me to my goal. To pass through Dis, I'll need angelic aid, and the grace of God before I make so bold to see the lower levels my sin has made. I approach the iron city of evil measure. Interesting.
I've dropped the link in for anybody who wants to come and join in the discussion. I want to talk about I always want to talk about the hard parts.
You want to go straight for the meat?
Yeah, right for the meat.
And I want to talk about let's talk about Dante's reaction to the torments of the soul of Filippo Argenti, because here we have something that stands in stark contrast to some of what we've seen before, where Dante often has pity on the souls that he sees. But here we have this is a person who wronged him personally.
Can you give me some background, Nate, like on that?
Yeah, it's believed that like Filippo Argente may have actually like been enriched by Dante being dispossessed of some of his material possessions. So it's like
Okay.
this is someone who was directly offended against Dante. So his reaction is quite different here, and he is praised for his reaction by Virgil.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just leave it at that for now. I have other thoughts of things that come later, but I just wanted to see what do we
Yeah.
what do we want to make about that? Like what do we think?
Well, I want to start with one thing because I think this applies to our reading of the poem in general, which is, the interesting that I would say the genius choice on Dante's part to not make this allegory in the classical sense, right? Because they could have gone down here and met wrath, right? The spirit of wrath could have been there in the mire, and so instead it's this person that embodied wrath in Dante's life, and so it gets considerably more complex when you step out of saying Dante criticizing wrath, right? Because that would just make sense, like Virgil being like, yes, Dante, you should recognize that wrath is a terrible thing and that it should, that wrath itself should burn in hell and that we should all desire, peace and shalom in the world. And so there's a tendency when I read that to think, or I guess probably people in general to read that and think Dante like hates this person. But I think a more just reading of it is to recognize that the human soul has the capacity to be given over to these things, sins, demons, I don't know, corruptions, whatever you want to call them. And that loving a person can't stand in the way of you despising those corruptions or those sins. Something like that.
No, I think you're headed in the right direction. I think that's I think it's inviting us to ask a question about, because especially since this is the circle of wrath, right?
Yeah.
So it's inviting us to ask the question about, well, is there a righteous side of it? Is there a place where its expression is appropriate?
Because Dante's wrathful here.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. How have I never seen that before? Oh my goodness. Thank you, Nate. Come on.
And so there's more than one way. There it's interesting because it's inviting us to ask about like whether there are not some occasions where wrath is appropriate, but it's also like pointing out the destruction and the danger that is contained in wrath, because here it's represented in in this circle of hell, and there's also yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
What do you think, Sherry?
Well, I mean, I've never questioned the idea that there can be kind of righteous anger. Joseph pointed out recently that in 1 Corinthians 13 it says love is not easily angered. It didn't say love is not angered. I had never noticed that either. He said he never noticed it, and I never noticed it either.
Right. Yeah, slow to wrath, not. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, and I've heard Margaret Barker talk about wrath as a consequence of not being proper, like you fall into it. I'm not talking about Dante falling into it. God's left hand. Yeah. I'm not talking about Dante falling becoming angry, but I'm talking about when you find yourself in the midst of wrath, right? Like this friend of his, he's in the midst of Dante's wrath for sure. And when that happens, it's because you've lost your proper orientation. And she talks about, and I'm not going to get this right because it's been a while since I read about it, but there's this covenant at I think it's called the Adamic covenant, or that's how she describes it, where you have this. She imagines it as a kind of net that we walk on. It's where we find ourselves moving. And when we live in proper reciprocal orientation to God, we stand on the net. When we lose that, we fall through it, and falling through the net casts you into a wrath. And what she's trying to do there is take away the idea that God suddenly loses his temper. Right? The wrath is always there, right? It's always there. And when so it's, I mean, I simplify it in my mind as thinking about it as chaos, a kind of chaos. Because when you find yourself in the wrath, like he describes here, mangled by a swarm of muddy wraiths, right? So it's just like something that's spinning and chaotic.
Well, even the swamp too, right, Sherry? It's in this weird in between place of it's not really solid, it's not really liquid.
That's right.
It's not the ocean, it's not the land. Everything's mixed up, and you sink through it, and up and down aren't really clear. Well, when you're talking about God's wrath again, like I feel like I'm waking up this morning. Great. Okay. In the poem that you read, right, he says from disordered passions to disordered will, right? That's the transition point that we're at. So we've gone through the circles of hell related to disordered passions, and the passions as such are not evil. It's that they're not oriented the right way, right? The sin of these circles of hell is that you've engaged with appropriate parts of your being in a wrong way, right?
Yeah, it's disordered, right? So it's like,
so there's
what are you prioritizing?
Right. There's the transition that we're hitting is the one in which like the things down below are never right. Like there's never an instance in which like treachery is the right thing to do. Right. But like, the circle of the greedy, it's like you're supposed to eat food. You're just not supposed to eat too much, right? You're supposed to be wrathful about some things, just not about everything. You're supposed to love some people in some ways and not everybody in this certain way. And so, I think that's the transition that we're running up against, is where it becomes the reason that things are about to get worse. Let's say that we're going down, and there's this movement from we're getting to a place where reason starts to need to have a supernatural infusion to help you get out of, is because we've just been dealing with natural goods used inappropriately, let's say. But it's really interesting to say that wrath is a natural good. That's worth thinking about.
Well, I always think about it in terms of the book of Job. Leviathan gets away. Hello. And God loves Leviathan, right? So, but this is the opposing force and that's why you're talking about in between spaces, right? Because you're talking about the place where these two things meet. That's the in between space. It's the place where the two opposing forces meet, and that's where we find ourselves much of the time, right? In this in between space. But I think that's where we are forged, right?
So,
yeah.
Let me think about this for a moment. So I would say that what if we think about wrath for a moment, because wrath is certainly not an indifferent emotion, right?
No.
So I think that if we want to think about wrath that is in the appropriate, like, righteous anger sense, then in order for that to be correct, it has to be a face of love.
I think it's a kind of compassion. I think it's a kind of compassion. I mean, if I want to be so bold, because
because
if it's righteous, it's focusing on the making of a person, right? It's agapic. So and I think if we just think back to probably not even that far as parents, we can think of times where our love becomes wrath in service to the making of a child.
And
that's exactly
not only that, there are times where, like, you would not be appropriately loving your child if if you did not express wrath.
Yeah.
Like in a righteous way.
I would even say that with your spouse, because I just think that's the game we're playing. We're playing the game of making one another right. Well, iron sharpening iron.
In Proverbs, right? It's like blows from a friend are more to be more trusted than kisses from an enemy. There's this capacity to be grateful for wrath, right? That's shown towards you. Like when you are doing the wrong thing, it's better for someone to punch you before you walk off the cliff, wake you up, right? It's like we should be glad there. Yeah, that's just abundantly clear to me.
That's why I like to think about it in terms of falling through the divine order of things, right? Yeah. It's a descent into wrath, right? Because you're no longer participating in the divine order, right? And so, like, there is a very like, we're again walking on this razor's edge here, because if we think of disorder as wrath, which it will cast us down into, right? Then we automatically want to jump to the idea that, well, we got to be ordered, but too much order is also not good. Okay, it's also not good. Like you can't just live your life focused on prioritizing your passions. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, you're going to be,
Part of that has to do with, again, to go back to Job, it has to do with knowledge, right? Because if you had perfect knowledge, then yes, you should be totally focused on order. I would agree with that, because you would know what the right order is. But if you don't know, and this is where the tyranny of order can come in, and this is why love is slow to become angry, is because do you know who to be angry with, right? There's that wonderful line, that discussion between Frodo and Gandalf that at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings that shows up several other times, where he's, it's a pity Bilbo didn't kill Gollum when he had the chance. And he says, pity that stayed his hand, and the fate of many may lie on Bilbo's mercy, on Bilbo's pity. There's a sense of unjust wrath is making that judgment at the wrong time. And so to kill someone like that is to judge their entire person. Yeah. Right. When we're disciplining our children, we're not judging the whole child. We should never be judging the child. We're judging a behavior on their part. Right. Mm-hmm. It's like, that was the wrong behavior, not you're messed up, you're wrong, I'm judging all of you. And so that's one of the weird things with hell is that, I'm going to leave you guys' positions aside on this. There's a degree of fixity there, right? In which, like, Filippo's story is over in one sense. And so Dante can look at him and say, like, dude, like, you just suck. Like, bad job, basically, right? Because there's not this sense of, like, well, Filippo's going to, like, become redeemed. And leaving aside previous discussions, I just, like, from the poetry of it, that's where he is. Like, he's in hell because wrath dominated his life. And so Dante can't. Hey, Graham.
Looked like you were having seizures. This phone doesn't know how to do this very well. What's going on?
Hey, good to see you, man.
man. I'm on the road on the way to Chad's. Do you see that arch thing over there?
Yep.
No. It's the,
No.
I guess it's the St. Louis one or whatever. Anyway, like I was driving right by it as Ted was reading his spiel, and that's my new members only video gonna upload any moment now. And then Sherry was reading that poem right as I crossed into the border of Illinois, and I felt that was terribly significant. What was that thing you were reading there, Sherry?
The poem?
At the front, yeah.
That was from there's an echo.
Sorry, I'm mute.
You want me to read the poem? Just nod.
No, well, you did as I crossed into Illinois. So grab a choice couple lines to remind people.
I approach the iron city of evil measure, where rebel angels mock my wandering soul, but I must pass them by to find my treasure, and reason cannot get me to my Chad.
So thank you for that. It was a special moment for me. Your readings provided and your discussion of wrath is important because that's the lion we're stuck on. So we're doing this thing where like each lion has an opponent process and it's all part of the dream catcher of optimal grip. And so we did the envy and admiration as opponent processes for the first one, but wrath we haven't figured out yet. So thank you for this exploration and everything you do.
Thanks, Grim, and have a safe trip, and give Chad a big hug for me.
I love that guy. He's good people.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, I don't know. This notion of judgment and wrath is fascinating.
I had a thought before Grim jumped on, and now it's gone.
Yeah. Oh no.
Well, I had a very spicy thought before Grim jumped on it. Well, two spicy thoughts. I do want to, of course, remind everyone that that this canto does still end with a reminder that the gates of hell have been smashed. So there's that, and then, and then the other thing that I wanted to say is that I can't help but think that as like in our like right now with the situation that is going on in Israel, this is the right time for us to be thinking about righteous anger. And when sometimes it's appropriate. Which is why I saw Hezi I see Hezi in the audience. If Hezi wants to get in here, he's
Listen, this is my thought that I had before Grim came on. And that maybe this will help Grim too, actually, in his little exploration of wrath and shame and guilt. So when we experience shame and guilt are different, but they often accompany one another. We often perceive that we are in the midst of someone's wrath, whether it be God's or someone we've offended, right? So does wrath then have the same function as shame and guilt? Is it redemptive, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yes, I think that's right.
It has to be. Or at least it has to have the capacity to be redemptive. Can I throw something from the text up that might kind of contrast with that in a good way?
Yeah.
I was really struck. One of the things I was really struck by is when he says, I want to see Filippo punished in this way. He says, after Filippo Argenti, all cried together, and the mad dog Florentine wheeled at their cry and bit himself for rage. I saw them gather. So the fact that his wrath even turns toward himself in this destructive way, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to read the rest.
Oh,
Ted,
yeah. Keep going.
And I say no more, and there we left him, right? No, actually, I saw them gather, and there we left him. And I say no more, but such a wailing beat upon my ears. And then I strained my eyes ahead to the far shore. I think what he's saying there is that he's looking towards the future, right? What is the result of this moment for, is it Filippo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can never get these characters straight here. Like in a sense, he has to do this and look to the future, right? He can't let those cries stop this from happening. Like it, his compassion, because like we've noted, he is pitiful of these souls, right? Normally speaking, but in this case, he has to look to the future in order to not interrupt the process that's happening at the moment. Right?
I think that's because he was affected by it. He needs to see justice in order to let go.
Well, I'm not sure if he needs justice. I think, and I'm really not sure. But what I'm saying is, because he was affected by it, he has more insight into it. Okay? He can almost, as a person who was wronged, he has spiritual eyes for what's happening to the person who wronged him. Like, what is it that caused them to wrong him, right? And so he knows that something needs to be purged from this person because he sees it, because he was affected by it, right? It was what motivated the wrongdoing, and so I think because he's so close to it, he has a better view, perspective, insight, all those things. That's just a theory.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
we can't critique something from the outside, right? We have to be inside of it in order to critique it properly. Jonathan Peugeot talks about this when he talks about the church, right? He's not really interested in critique from the outside of the church, of the Orthodox Church, for example. He's more interested in critique from the inside, right? Because then you're interacting, you have this reciprocal relationship with something, and you get to see what it is spiritually that's happening. And I think that the same thing is true here. He can't necessarily in these other encounters with these other spirits, he can only really feel pity because he hasn't been on the inside of those things. He's only seen them from the outside, as far as I can tell. But this is an inside thing, right?
Yeah.
And that's different.
Can I think this might connect. I was just throwing my mind back to the other circles that we've passed through already. And because I think what you're saying there, Sherry, I think that there's something very much right. I mean, I think it's obvious that Dante, either the pilgrim or also the writer, like had experiences of wrath. Like that's quite clear. I don't know how you could write the Inferno without having some experiences of wrath internally. But there's this sense in which so far the punishments of hell are something that's suffered, right? That happens to these souls. And this is the first time we get to somewhere where the souls are inflicting harm on themselves. And I think that's a similar transition point. I think maybe part of that's why Dante partially it's because Dante's been inside this. And so he sees the self-destructiveness of sin. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. Like the more clear-eyed you are, when you look at others, it's easier to see their lives as suffering, and then when you look at yourself, it's easier to see how you're culpable. I would say that's like a more appropriate stance to take. Like you should be more quick to look at your own life and say, oh, these are the ways that I've brought these things on myself, and positively, therefore, like I can repent of them. And with other people, like we should be much slower to say, well, obviously it's because you're messing up. Like we don't want to be Job's friends. It's like, let's see, there's this sense of pity is a more appropriate response to the sins outside of us. And let's say wrath is a more appropriate response to the sins inside of us. But there's also this transition of seeing sin as being something like these disordered goods to something that's, say, actively destructive. And when you're talking about it, right, Dante sees how it has harmed him, right? This thing that Filippo, for whatever reason, has allowed to take over him, right? Because that's sort of the idea that we're seeing is that wrath is more and more he's less and less Filippo and more wrath.
Okay, so maybe
and I think it's like, and I think let me see if I'm getting Sherry. Let me see if I understand this correctly.
Yeah.
What I think that Sherry is trying to say is that Dante needs to see what happens to Filippo in order to be able to let go of his own wrath. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I don't understand you at all. Please try to help me understand.
I love it.
Well, as far as I can tell, this is what I'm trying to say. And I'm probably saying more than I know that I'm saying, but it's like, because you're wondering why Dante doesn't feel pity in this case, okay? And that, I think, is the first place that we go to when we see something suffering or someone suffering. And so, yeah, that's exactly how I see that, Kezi. It's yeah. Anyway, so why isn't Dante feeling any pity? Why does he have to close his ears and look to the other shore? Why does he have to ignore this thing's suffering? And even if it's self-inflicted, right? So I think that if to make it more plain, let's look at what Nate was talking about earlier, the conflict in the Middle East. Okay. Because there are a lot of people in the world right now who are observing that from the outside, and they are succumbing to pity. Okay? That's what they do. It's only natural. But the people who are on the inside of the conflict, Israelis, Palestinians, they are not. They have integral knowledge, and I mean that in a very spiritual way, right? Integrated knowledge of what is actually going on. And I think it's actually probably almost ineffable, right? Because when you start talking about it, it sounds ridiculous to the rest of the world, especially because it's a secular world and this is a spiritual battle, because all battles are spiritual. Everything happens on a metaphysical plane, right? And then descends down into the world, in my opinion. So that's how I'm seeing this. It's like Dante is able to stem that pity because he's inside of the conflict. Does that make any sense to you?
Interesting. That was like actually almost, well, maybe it's, I felt like I was getting the exact opposite insight. I'll put it for you before you share it, and we'll see if, okay, yeah. Because when you started talking about his position and looking ahead, the first thing that I thought is my tendency. So say I get, like a Discord server or a news site or something. There's this tendency, you can let like possible opportunities of wrath just like wash over you, right? So you're just like, oh my goodness, the thing they're doing to children and the things going on in schools and the things that politicians are doing. And there's this like stirring up of indignation in you, right? And so you can just get totally, or local politics or whatever, you can get completely like caught up by this spirit of wrath over these matters. And the thing that you have to do is you have to get off of Twitter. Or you have to like,
I'm not on that stuff, so I don't have that experience.
But you know what I'm saying? Well, okay, but Sherry, have you ever been in a conversation where like the spirit of the conversation is you just all start talking about like bad things that are going on, right? And they're actually bad things, but like the conversation is one of just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're doing this, and oh my goodness, the birth rate and the crazy environmentalists and the totalitarian whatever, and you just kind of like, there's this, and you can feed off of it, right? You can live on that to some degree. Like I'll just say it, like Daily Wire does that. Like that's what it lives on mostly.
Okay, so let's just look at this here, because I think this is pertinent, right? Is wrath just a feeling? Like this, I don't think it is. Wrath is a consequence of wrong orientation. It's a falling through the covenant, right? It's losing your direction. It's and this is for the person who falls into the wrath, not the person who feels the wrath, like feels it, who and it's tricky. It's tricky here because both there's two faces of wrath happening right now. There's the wrath that's happening to the guy, and then there's the wrath that Dante feels. But we have
good. That's good, Sherry. Let's just focus for just a moment and let's think about that, because he actually presents us with both faces in himself, the one who suffered the wrath, who fell into the wrath, and the person who perpetrated it upon him. So both are portrayed here. So from what can you glean from the way that the images that Dante's actually putting before us in the canto?
What can you glean? Is that what you said? Sorry,
yeah.
I was reading. Okay.
That's okay.
Well, I mean, I what I get from this is that there are consequences to your actions, okay? And sometimes you have to let, and this is all about discernment, right? Sometimes you have to let the person suffer the consequences of their actions. And I think that like this is where Peterson says, be careful about taking away someone's suffering. Okay, that's what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, but I think especially for Dante, because we're circling around this idea of righteous anger, which is what Dante's feeling. Okay, Dante is able to discern this. He's able to walk away. He's able to let this person suffer because he was on the inside of it. I feel very strongly about that, because he knows he's seen the thing, right, that motivated the whole catastrophe, right, between them.
I'm tracking
Sherry,
now, Sherry.
Again, so that it seems this is why maybe I got ahead of where you were. Maybe I got ahead of you coming to where you are.
Maybe you did.
This is where I saw you had it all. This is where I saw you had it all along. Is that Dante needs to see this in order to move past it, and he does. It's like once it happens, once Filippo falls into the mire, he does in fact move past it.
Yeah, and I think that's why Dante can look to the other shore, right? Because there is something more here. Like this is not. And
I don't think it's an accident or coincidence that the canto ends by us being reminded that the gates of hell have been smashed.
Yeah,
and that what happens here is necessary for the healing of both Dante and Filippo.
That's why I said it's redemptive, right? Like let's think about it in terms of redemption and not destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we'll call this head spiciness. You have to acknowledge the destruction before there can be redemption, I think. If you don't, if you don't see the destructiveness of wrong wrath, then you can't be redeemed out of it. And like that, at least Dante, the writer, frames his entire journey through hell as exactly that. To say like, I was asleep, right? And like in my sleep, I was filled with sin. And the only way to get out of that was not to just be woken up, or let's say the waking up is to walk through hell, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, if you're going to pass through wrath, you have to see wrath for what it is, right? The goal of wrath is to make itself obsolete. And that's great, Corey. Like, yeah. Well, yes.
Well, that's why I equated it to shame and guilt. Okay.
And
yes.
And when wrath works itself, when it's appropriate wrath, when it works itself out, then it leads to reconciliation. Which is why I brought it up in the context of the current conflict, because people just saying ceasefire are not willing to allow it to work itself out.
Okay, so let me read this. I was having a conversation this morning with someone about something totally different, but they sent me this quote by Wendell Berry. To go into the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark. Go without sight and know that the dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and wings. And I think that a lot of people, myself included, we're afraid of the dark. Yeah. We're just simply afraid of the dark.
I don't know why it made me think of this, but I just like my wife and I were helping to care for my mom this last weekend. She at my sister's house after her last round of chemo, and we went and got a small TV for her to be able to use that while she's at my sister's house, and we watched. There's a Netflix series, All the Light You Cannot See. And it's funny because my mom and I had this like kind of like polite disagreement, but definitely a disagreement around the idea like about truth and what constitutes truth. And I was referencing George MacDonald's unspoken sermon, I Am the Truth, where he talks about truth, the idea of truth as a person. And then we watched this mini-series, and this mini-series is like, this is clearly the theme that it is dealing with. There's this scene in the film where it's like these resistance fighters, they're looking at only the facts, right? They're looking at only the facts of like what this person has done. He's a young German communications officer, German radio operator, and without his actions have led to bad things that have happened, but it's not the truth of who he is. Like the truth of, like if as you watched it, I mean, you watch the film, it's like mostly from his perspective. The miniseries is mostly from his perspective. It is not, in fact, at all. Those facts are not at all the truth of what he is, and I think that's like the title of the miniseries is All the Light We Cannot See. And that's really appropriate because it's like when we're talking about truth as the truth of a person, like we are never able to see everything clearly.
Yeah, and this is all the light that we cannot see. There is no place empty of you, right? Like this is the thing that we and so this is what makes Dante's anger righteous. He's letting, George MacDonald talks about this a lot. Like he says that, you're not going to get away with it. You're going to have to pay back every last farthing, right?
Yeah.
Every last farthing.
I was thinking of that of MacDonald of that from MacDonald earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we see here. Like that's what's going on is the paying of the last farthing. It has to be paid. It's like
it has to be paid.
But at the end, what are we reminded of? That the gates of hell have been smashed.
And there's another shore. That's why Dante's looking across at it, right? He's anticipating the other side of this, right?
Yeah, but Sherry, the other side's really bad.
Yeah, the other side he's looking for is
well, like, you know, my mother always used to tell me when I got a boo-boo, she'd say, well, it's got to get worse before it gets better.
Oh, right. That's like the next 25 cantos.
Yeah, 25 cantos. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. That's one thing we didn't talk about is like, this is interesting because there's that little interesting bit at the beginning where he said, where Dante makes it clear that he's picking this back up after having set it aside for a while. And the structure of the poem changes because so far we've had one circle of hell for every canto. And then all of a sudden now this is the first time where it's like, okay, this is going to be stretched across multiple cantos. Yeah. So the intended structure of the poem has changed.
Yeah. There's some interesting stuff too in terms of his past versus present tense in this as well. Just like on a textual level, that's interesting. There's some shifts there. But
is it just out of curiosity, is it seemingly incoherent?
No, Dante does this. He's more
seemingly. Like, does it make you wonder where you are in time?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being too straightforward, but like I buy that. It makes sense to me that he does it to produce a sense of immediacy, right? And there is,
I think Bob Dylan does a similar thing in the song Tangled Up in Blue, where he does this weird shifting between past and present tense. And I think it's precisely for that reason, is to make it feel as immediate as possible.
Yeah. So two things. I want to go back, Sherry. I really appreciate that you picked up this part about Dante, like closing his ears to the conflict and looking ahead. There's two things. One is, I'm going to break the rules a little bit and say then in the next canto, the opposite thing happens where he has to shield his eyes and listen. And both times that's interesting. But there's this sense in which that is how you escape wrath. There's this sort of, if you're going to get where you're supposed to be going, which is what Dante is doing because he's the pilgrim, right? So the whole thing about a pilgrim is that you're going somewhere, right? Your entire life is oriented towards a journey. And there's this possibility, we're seeing the possibility of Dante losing the thread, which actually makes it really interesting that he opens with that, Nate. It makes it really interesting that he opens with, now I return to my theme, because there's a sense of, yes, you have to keep going. If you're a pilgrim, you have to keep going. And one of the problems with the wrong wrath is that it lowers your gaze. Like, let's say that, I don't even know if it might be the definition of wrong wrath, sinful wrath, is it lowers your gaze. And so the way that he escapes is by looking up and remembering where he's headed and not saying.
That's what I was talking about with the Margaret Barker thing, right?
Yes.
It's about orientation. It's about face to face, right? And it's interesting that, when you were talking about what's coming, with the blind, shielding the eyes, and here he's in a sense ignoring what he can hear. Okay. Oh shoot! Now I lost the thought. Well, our senses can be deceptive, right? Like what we see and what we hear can be deceptive, and we have to remind ourselves by perhaps even just ignoring those senses that nothing is what it seems, right?
That's poetry, by the way.
Yes.
That's like the whole point. That's the whole point. Look again. Look at it again.
Look again. And don't believe, Meister Eckhart talks about that. Don't believe your old eyes, he says. He calls them your old eyes, okay?
Right.
Don't believe your old eyes. Like, you have to be careful about what you see because, and I mean, we should be hyper aware of this at this point in time with the internet right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is like a total sidetrack, but Sherry, you started off like before we started recording talking about the fact that you just had this conversation with a friend about the divine feminine.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you this question. Is it like when we look again and realize that things were not as they seemed, do things change or have we changed? And I think this is actually related, Sherry. I know that you are like you have this deep intuition or about the transformation of the whore into the virgin. Like again, it's like what is at the core of that change? Has anything external changed, or have we changed?
Oh, well, I don't think. Okay, well that gets down to what is transformation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about the simple example of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, the question is, did the caterpillar disappear? Has the caterpillar been destroyed? Yes and no, right? Because now the caterpillar is in the butterfly, right? The caterpillar, everything about the caterpillar has become the butterfly, but they don't look the same, right? And so one is gone and the other one is there. And this is why you have to think about Meister Eckhart saying, don't believe your old eyes. Don't believe your old eyes, right? Because the caterpillar is not gone. And so that's how I think of the Virgin and the whore of Babylon, right? And I think that's how God sees us. It's this transformational process. Like we also whore, right? There's a lot of description of whoring. I mean, look at poor old what's his name, the prophet Hosea.
Mm-hmm.
God told him to go marry one. Go marry one. That's what I'm doing. So, you know, this is how I understand this, right? It's not I think that a lot of the terminology for like wrath and destruction and annihilation and fires and, you know, all that stuff, it's the process of transformation, right? It feels like that. It looks like that, right? But nothing is actually gone. Because how can you? I don't know if that answers your question, Nate. Did I get off track?
No. I think it is. I think that it's like I've always been resistant to it, but maybe it's because I just watched this miniseries that focuses on a radio operator that's making me think about it in a different way.
Okay.
But this like idea of like of changing your frequency, I think is a really
totally
powerful metaphor, because it's not. I personally don't think that it's that anything has, from one point of view, nothing has changed, but at the same time everything has changed.
That's right.
Because the frequency at which you are tuned into is going to determine what information you receive, right? So maybe maybe you have the same radio you've always had, but if you turn it to a different channel,
well, that's why I think that's what discernment is about.
Information.
Discernment to me is about, you know, listening to the voice and determining who that is, right? Because there's a lot of voices out there. And I mentioned this in the Boxer the other day. You know, there's a verse where Jesus says, you know, what I whisper in your ear, shout it from the rooftops, right? And he's talking about language of the heart and being courageous enough to express that language of the heart. But the key is what I whisper in your ear, right? So you need to spend a lot of time being able to discern these voices, because there's a lot of them, and you can't be afraid. Like this is Nate and I have talked about this before, about perfecting your own intuition is to practice it, right? Is to say, I have this feeling, or I have this thought that just came up, or, and throwing it out there in humility to see, because this is what gives you the ability to actually discern the voice, right? Is whether or not this thing has the depth and profundity that it would have if it was divine.
Although if it's sufficiently profound, you also run the risk that no one will understand you. At the same time.
Well, but that's not important, actually. Like if you're doing this this is the parable of the sower for me. Yeah. That you're casting seeds, right? And you don't know where they fall. So some of them are going to grow up, and some of them are going to shrivel up and die.
Not casting your pearls before swine. I don't know. There's some weird valence between those two that I think wisdom probably directs. I was going to take what the two of you were talking about, and I think that it actually ties in really, really well with the Divine Comedy, because the Divine Comedy is about love. Spoiler for anyone who didn't know that. It's about love. And everything that happens to Dante is God's love to him. And so when you look at the fact that the first third of the Divine Comedy is about hell, and the second third of it is about purgatory, it's like, okay, that says something about love. And
it's purifying, right?
It's purifying. That's exactly it. So for Dante, hell is purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's transient. It's transient, right? Like it's not
transient. And because, look, here's the thing: is that you're just, no one gets to heaven except through hell. Like that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just the question is like, what's your relationship to the suffering? And I think that this is the craziness that our world is. Part of the craziness that our world is suffering from right now is that we've got this notion that we can create material conditions that will let us escape from suffering hell. And we can't do it, because the more that you mitigate external circumstances, the more that suffering becomes internal. And I don't have to lay out for anyone, hopefully, the whole meaning crisis aspect of this little corner is just an exact response to that, to the fact that material, like we were talking about with Luke, from Pageau's conversation, more stuff, right? We've got this notion that we can just throw stuff at hell. We'll fill hell up if we throw enough stuff in it. And you won't. It'll just move inside. And so the question is not, can I escape hell? The question is not, is there a way out of suffering? The question is, what is the suffering going to do to me? And Sherry, it's funny that you're bringing up the butterfly and the caterpillar, because actually in Purgatorio, Dante the writer uses that exact thing. And he says, look, we're all worms. But we should realize that, basically, I'm glossing it a little. We should realize that worms appropriately turn into butterflies.
Yeah, well, this is what Gregory of Nyssa says this, according to Father John Baer, that we're embryos. This is what we pupa, right?
Yes. Yeah. So So what are we going to do with that suffering? And that's exactly that say that frequency thing, right?
Well, I think this is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he says, unless a seed goes into the ground and dies.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's no way that it can come back, or whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will save it. It's the Golden Echo, the Leaden Echo, and the Golden Echo by Gerard Manley Hopkins. Give beauty back, beauty back, beauty self and beauty's maker.
Even the Passion of Christ. We think that he went through hell, but then he went through hell.
Yes. Yeah.
This is why I read the Wendell Berry thing, right? Go into the dark. Go into the dark.
Right.
Go dark.
Well, speaking of Wendell I mean, this again, that's like, and I know we're going to sound like a broken record with the three of us, but like, this is like this idea of poetry as witness. This is what it's doing. It's like it's teaching you to tune that frequency, to see, to look again and see what's really there.
Well, this is also like what I kept saying throughout the Book of Job series with Jess, was that Job went out into the landscape of pain and suffering. He was not afraid of it, right? He went dark. He embraced it. He moved into it, right? And all of Job's friends were like, "Whoa, no," because that could happen to us. Right? We don't want to go in. We don't want to go in the dark. Right? We don't want to go there. And I think, and I kept saying this throughout the whole series, was we have to be willing to go into that landscape of pain and suffering. And that's exactly what Dante's doing, right?
Okay, but that's
wait, maybe you can help me with this. Because Dante goes in there as a live person, not as a dead one. Okay?
Yes.
So he keeps getting told, no, you're not supposed to be here, right?
Yeah, they're mad.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the Greek, that was sort of the classical way, was like you hold on to life until the very end. Like, why would you ever go into hell as a living person? You never do that. You hold on to life as long as you can. Because in their notion, they didn't know about the resurrection. But when the resurrection comes, then it makes sense to go into hell as a living man. But I was just thinking, Sherry, when you're talking about going into the dark, like Job, the first thing that struck me was when we started to practice the traditional Lenten season as Catholics. And you're praying the rosary and you stop meditating on the joyful and the glorious mysteries. You're not thinking about the incarnation, and you're not thinking about the resurrection and the assumption of Mary. It's just the sorrowful mysteries. 40 days straight. It's all you're praying. The church, the images start to be covered up. The altar is more and more bare. You're eating less food. The songs are sorrowful, and it's like you get towards the end of it, and you kind of forget what it was like to be on the other side. It's not a day. It's not a week. It's like it's a chunk of time. You're like, what was it like to eat breakfast? I don't really remember.
Well, like when I was talking to this friend of mine this morning about this, I said, this is what the divine feminine, this is what the divine feminine invites into, right? The dark. This is why the Virgin says, "Let it be unto me," right? She has no idea what that means. It's dark, right? She can't know it. She just has to be open to it, right? And that's what when at the wedding at Cana, she says to Jesus, she invites him into the dark, right? She opens the door into the dark, into the mystery, right? And it's how does this start? How does this? It starts out with three women going, "Come on." Right?
Well, but in God there is no shadow of turning, and is it the dark, or is it all the light we cannot see?
It is all the light we cannot see. That's right.
Yeah, right. There's it's that unapproachableness, it's weird. I mean, there's a lot of times where things kind of look similar on both ends, even when they're the opposite of each other.
Well, I like to think of it as the divine inversion, right? It's the divine inversion, right? Where, and this is like in the liturgical calendars of the Catholic and the Orthodox churches, maybe even the Anglican, but I'm not as familiar. But this is what the Lenten season is about. It's from the darkness to the light, right? This is what the Matin service is about. It starts in the darkness and it ends at after the sun rises. So you move from the darkness into the light. You move from the darkness into the light, right?
Yeah,
that's what.
Because the whole thing of life, our lives on this earth, is to get ready for that, and to believe that it's actually going to happen to us, right? Because why else would you? voluntarily.
And if you are an embryo, right? If you're a pupa and an embryo, you're what? In the dark.
You're in the dark. So this year was the first year we got to go to the traditional midnight Easter Mass, the Easter Vigil service, and I know it's not as long as the Eastern Rite, but it's pretty long. And you start out and you're outside, and then they light the fire at like 10 o'clock at night, and then you process inside with the light, and then there's about 2 hours of liturgy by candlelight, and the whole time they're just incense and incense and incense, and so the place is just absolutely just chock full, and you're worn out, especially if you've got young kids you're trying to manage. I mean, you're just barely awake, and then midnight hits, and it's like all the lights in the church go on, just chock full of smoke, and they're ringing bells for like, I don't know, it feels like 10 minutes straight, and all of these joyful songs, and it's absolutely shocking. Like it's like a kick in the head. I mean, it's wild, that moment of like coming out of the dark. That's exactly it. And you're like, where am I? Something has happened. It's a powerful thing. But if you don't believe, and this is the thing that I keep trying to get at, like, it's not a simple thing to put your daily experience, say, of certain things like comfort on the line for that. And that's basically the whole thing that we're called to. When Christ says, pick up your cross, he's calling us to say, put your daily experience on the line, on the expectation that it will be resurrected now and in the world to come. But like, it's got to die first.
Yeah.
When I say something and Sherry and Nate are both quiet, I mean, there's something. No, I'm thinking. I'm actually thinking. So Ted, I'm actually thinking about the most recent conversation I had with Chris Green and Jed, where we were talking about Bulgakov's eschatology, but there was like, we talked about a lot. There was like a long build up to the conversation, and we talked about a lot of other stuff too. And one of the things I talked about was, this was actually in the context of the essays that he had actually written about Bulgakov's eschatology. And I focused on the idea of remembrance and how, like, how remembrance is actually connected to resurrection. And that what we are looking toward on the eschatological horizon is the actualization of all goods. But the one thing we are promised is forgotten: our sins.
Yeah, so, like when you finished talking there, Ted, the first thing that came to my mind was gratitude. Because there's also an exhortation to actually live, capital L, right? So, like, how do we die and live at the same time, right? And I think that we do that through gratitude, because that's what kills us, okay? It's gratitude. Gratitude is what makes us humble.
Yes.
Because we see the world as a gift. We see what we have as a gift. And we've no longer acquired something, but rather it was given to us, right? I remember one time we were going through some financial difficulties, and I had a bunch of Highland cows, and I was like panicking about hay and, being able to afford it. And then a friend of mine, I shared with her what was going on, and she was just like, "Oh my God, and what are you going to do?" And then I kind of wanted to get out of that space. And so I went for a walk, and I was walking past my cows, and they were all on a hill. Okay. And I looked at them and I went, my father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. What am I worried about? They're not mine. you know, and he's looking after them. And then I can't remember the circumstances. I just remember that there was some miraculous thing happened. It was like money fell from the sky kind of thing, you know, like totally unexpected. And it was all looked after just like that. Right. And so yeah, like we really, this is our struggle, right, between life and death and abundance and scarcity and gratitude and seeing things as a gift or having, you know, and yeah.
So right here's the threat of abundance, like the dark side of abundance is that abundance leads to ingratitude, that we forget like what the source of the abundance is.
Yes.
And so that's like, so I think we will actually truly have abundance when we remember, going back to this idea of memory again, right? When we remember the source of the abundance. If we remember the source of the abundance and are appropriately grateful for the gifts that we have been given, then I think that abundance is only and truly a blessing. But sometimes at this moment it becomes a curse. It becomes a curse upon us because we forget its source.
No, I mean, Nate, that is so dead on. I mean, that's exactly dead on. And I again, I'm probably sounding like just a tolling bell, but you know, in the preface of in the mass. So this is in the middle of the mass, right? There's this back and forth. Lift up your hearts. We've lifted them up to the Lord. Let us give thanks. It is right and just. And the priest says, it is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation always and everywhere to give you thanks, O Lord. It's like, there you go. Our duty and our salvation always and everywhere to give you thanks. And Sherry, did I catch you right that you're saying that it's gratitude that helps us die?
Yes.
Because man, yes. Let's go.
It's gratitude that kills us is what I said.
Yes. Oh, I mean, it's so right. Look. I mean, think about if there's been a time where you're like frustrated with your spouse and you go and you try to thank them for something. First of all, it destroys your resentment. So it kills that part of you, but it also feels like it's killing you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, Ted, also just to reinforce what you were just saying, also there's the line in the offertory, of your own have we given you.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Of your own have we given you. I mean, that's like, I say this in the most reverent, I want to say this in the most reverent way possible. But like, that's the joke of the Eucharistic celebration, right? Like we come to God with these gifts, right? The bread and the wine. And it's like, well, but we give you of your own because God gave us the bread and the wine. And then we give them to him. And then what does he do with them? He takes them and then immediately gives them back to us as his son, right? And it's like, which would be enough. And then we give this, we offer this. He lets us offer the son to the Father. And then what does he do? When we do that, then he gives us the son back to eat.
Well,
you can't outgive him. You just can't outgive him.
Although, Ted, it's bread and wine, right? Which certainly we did not create the grapes or the wheat.
Yes.
But we have added something to the gifts that we have been given, and the grapes and the wheat, and then we offer it back to God because ultimately he is the source.
Absolutely.
So there is a role. We have done something in this process.
Undoubtedly. And I mean, the sacramental view is even more astonishing than that, Nate. More astonishing than baking bread and brewing wine. But like that transformation, the coming of the presence of Christ waits on the ordained minister, on the priest. Like the humility of God to do that, to say, I'm not going to come to you in this way until a man says these words. It's like, does this liturgy, like,
well, but here's the thing. It's like the presencing of Christ is always dependent upon human action.
Yes. In that way,
Really, it's like we
Yeah.
are the body, right?
Yeah,
No,
it's
there
so
is like
astonishing.
Christ comes into the world through human
man. Yeah.
action.
Okay, so
through us.
when you were laughing there, Ted, tell me if I'm right. I got the sense that was joy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
because when you realize that when you're in the place of gratitude and abundance, right? Because that's what gratitude teaches you. It teaches you that there is abundance, right? Then suddenly you burst with joy, right? And what does Scripture say about joy? It says, "The joy of the Lord
is our strength."
Is your strength.
We are no longer talking about Dante. If anybody wants to jump in, if you feel like you need to have read the Divine Comedy to participate in the conversation, that is no longer the case. So this is now an open stream to whoever wants to join.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a good conversation, and I don't regret it. I'm just saying.
I'm Sherry. I mean, look, right. This is to both of your points. Like when you pray the litany of Loretto, one of the ways that we refer to Our Lady is she is the cause of our joy, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, and the Eucharistic celebration is called the source. It's the source and summit of faith. And there's this sense in which and then Dr. Fagerberg, who I love from the lectures that I've heard of him, I mean, does such a good job of this, that the liturgy is the call to participate in the perichoresis of the Trinity. Like we're being called into, that's what we're being called into. And I on a basic like anthropological level, I don't think that any vision of humanity more astonishing and audacious and glorious and full of joy has ever been presented than that. Right. That liturgy calls you into the life of the Divine Trinity.
I want to say here, I thought we were the bride of Christ, not the body. There's no difference between those two.
Thank you.
Okay, because Adam says to Eve, "Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Okay.
After Cherry, yes.
and Scripture uses both sets of language.
And the two shall become what?
The two shall become one flesh. Yes. Husband and wife are one flesh. Yeah.
I just had to, let's do distinction without division.
Yeah. And this is where the whole Divine Comedy is headed, by the way. And like when I said that, spoiler, the Divine Comedy is about love, like I really meant it. And so, maybe one of the great literary failings of education in the West has been to teach people to have high school and college students read the Inferno and not the rest of the Commedia, because like where all of this is headed is joy. The only is joy. It's joy at the end. It's all joy at the end.
Why do you think that the decision was made to teach the Inferno and not the rest of the Commedia?
I mean, do you want my cynical answer?
Yeah, I do actually. I'm thinking cynical
I do want
right
your cynical
now.
Answer.
Because for the same reason that Dante yells at what's his name? The wrathful sinner that we've just seen. Filippo? Yeah.
Filippo Argenti.
Filippo Argenti, because we all have that taste for salt and blood, and as what does C.S. Lewis say? He says heaven is an acquired taste. Right? That's why I would say, because for exactly that reason, it takes a formed person to desire heaven. Like this is the thing. Like you have to work at it. You have to work at. But if you long for hell, you're not capable of receiving joy. And this is the thing, is that like, we all think, well, if I just get what I want, then I'll get joy. And it's like, no. If you want the wrong thing, you will not get joy. You actually have to change what you want in order to have joy. I love Chesterton when he says, to the man who wants nothing, I have nothing to give. It's not a given that we want what's good. And this is like,
we don't know what's good. We actually don't know what's good. That's why we just have to be grateful. Like seriously.
I agree, were you there when Chad told that Chinese parable on Thursday?
Yeah.
Did you listen to that? Oh, I mean, that's
yeah.
just perfect. It's just perfect. It's like, oh, what a terrible thing your horse ran away. I don't know. Oh, what a great thing your horse came back with 50 more horses. Maybe. Oh, what a terrible thing your son's hip is broken. I don't know.
Jess and Luke and I did a thing on Jess's channel, and Jess clipped that whole parable, that Chinese farmer story. Alan Watts tells it, and he put it at the beginning of our talk, actually.
But there's another level, right? Because there's this sort of like emptying yourself of making a judgment, and that's good as far as that goes. But the thing about Christianity is that it tells a different story, which is that, well, it's what the writer of the Epistle to the Hebrews says, which is consider as hardship as the Lord's discipline. And so you've gone from saying this sort of agnostic, I'm going to wait, which is appropriate to know what these things are, to all of a sudden, now everything comes to me through the lens of the love of the Father. And that's a whole nother, like that cubes the square, right? You're being wise on this plane, and then all of a sudden it's just dropped the bottom out, and it says that it's all love. It's actually not all something to be revealed. You're waiting on learning how it was God's love, rather than waiting on whether or not it was good or bad. And I just keep thinking, this whole conversation, I keep thinking of this line in The Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot, where he says there's two things that look alike. Three things that look alike. One is, he describes these hedgerows. There's a hedgerow that's dead, and then how does he put it? There's a hedgerow that's dead, and then there's a hedgerow that's asleep for the winter. And there are certain things that look very similar. They can be right up next to each other, but like, let's say they're headed in the opposite direction. And I think this is like Dante's wrath and Filippo's wrath to some degree. There's something that happens there for Dante, where that wrath is for his salvation, and for Filippo, it's for his damnation.
Well, if there can be an inversion, there has to be two faces of everything.
Yeah.
I think, right? Well, like, in order for an inversion to be a possibility. Yeah. And I mean, the more you think about this topic, the more difficult it becomes, because we want a recipe of how to behave, right? So that we get to where we want to go. But this is not about wanting. This is about being, right? And that's what I have to remind myself of. Go ahead.
So you'll be proud of me for this, Sherry. There was a Twitter discussion that I did not get involved in. It was a theological discussion about like whether God could choose to not love his creation, which is, and I did not participate in it, but this is what I wanted to say, that the person who thinks that this is a valid distinction and this is a correct category is still caught in they're still caught in the world of the serpent. Mm-hmm. Because like this is thinking of divinity in the way that Eve did when she was tempted, to think that being a divine being involves making choices, deliberative choices, is not to have understood
nice, Nate,
divinity at all, because you're thinking that God's freedom is like our freedom.
Well, that's why I love that.
Begin to comprehend what the freedom of God is.
Yeah, like that's why I love that.
The freedom of God simply is creativity and love. Like that's what it is.
That's why I love the quote about love loves unto purity by George MacDonald, right? Because I always get this spiraling image in my mind when I read it. You know, like a they make these giant drill things when they make tunnels in Switzerland, right? Mm-hmm. And that thing just goes, right? And it goes for the benefit of, the road crew, right? It's not going to stop. It's just going to keep drilling that tunnel right out of the side of the mountain. And that's how I feel about, like, God doesn't deliberate. Should I make a tunnel? Should I, be the sculptor? Should I form that clay? He just does, because that's what love does. Love loves unto purity.
Yes, and we this is like, and we say that God chooses, right? We talk about, like, the scriptures talk about God choosing, but God's choosing is never the kind of choosing that is deciding between alternatives. It is always the kind of choosing that says, "I want you."
Mm-hmm.
That is the kind of choosing that God does.
Yeah. What if it's like God chooses God God chooses
The
love?
"I don't want you" choice is only a choice that we can make.
Yeah, this is what Father Bear says, right? When he says, God in the beginning, God said, "Let us make," right? No, God said, "Let there be." God said, "Let there be, let there be, let there be." But then when he came to the human being, he said, "Let us make." And then he rounds out that conversation with, now it's up to us to say, "Let there be," right? Now it becomes reciprocal, where we have to say, "Let there be." And this is where the Theotokos always comes in for me, because that's what she says, right? To God, "Let it be unto me." So, yeah.
It's what I mean. Tragically, it's also what Jesus says at Gethsemane too.
Yes, he does. Yes, exactly.
But Nate, I mean, that's so relevant to what we've been saying here about all of this and about the
It
of
is.
hell is that your prayer doesn't change, right? The thy will be done. Like that's the prayer that takes you from the Annunciation to Gethsemane all the way through. Uh, and so if you're going to be a good pilgrim, then there's actually just one thing that's necessary in the end, and it's the capacity to say, "Your will be done," right? And we see this even Dante. Dante is more than happy to share his failings as a pilgrim. He says, stay here and feed your soul. On what does he say? Feed your soul on good hope. Take heart, nothing can take our passage from us when such a power has given warrant for it. Wait here and feed your soul while I am gone upon comfort and good hope. I will not leave you to wander in this underworld alone. So the sweet guide and father leaves me here, and I stay on in doubt with yes and no, dividing all my heart to hope and fear. It's like he's more than happy to share his failing, because in the end, it's always, fiat, right? That's
Yeah.
always the answer. And that's, thinking about the rosary. It's like when you pray the rosary, it's this memory over and over and over. This is how we respond to God, like fiat voluntas tua. It's like, your will be done. It's the Our Father, all of the prayer over and over. Thy will be done, thy will be done, thy will be done. And that's actually the same thing as gratitude, Sherry.
Yes, it is.
Isn't it?
Totally is. Totally is. Yeah,
It's the same thing as gratitude.
it is. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
that thing you said about the division of the yes and the no, it just made me think of
Schomburg.
something. Yep. This is just a quick line from this is from letter 3 on the Empress. The flaming sword of the Guardian of Eden is a weapon of divine magic. This means to say, it is essentially a yes and not a no. It is essentially constructive and not destructive. In other words, it invites, encourages, and directs all those who are worthy, all that which is worthy in each person, to the benefits of the tree of life. And it forbids, discourages, and sends away all those who are unworthy, and all that which is unworthy in each person. The flaming sword is a benediction to those who seek the tree of eternal love, which is the tree of life, and at the same time, by the very fact that blesses, the flaming force prohibits those who seek the tree of life in order to take possession of its fruits. The sword of the Holy Guardian of Eden is always active in the spiritual life of humanity. It calls the seekers and repulses thieves. Thanks to it, Hermeticism, the millennial-old tradition of the uninterrupted pursuit of the ideal of the great work, exists in spite of all the chimera, all the illusions, and all the forms of charlatanism, conscious and unconscious, which accompany this pursuit.
You know, when I read this here, it says, I stay on in doubt with yes and no, dividing all my heart to hope and fear. Because we have to say yes or no, right? At some, like, we have to choose. We always have to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And that choice will always evoke hope and fear, because we ultimately don't know. And this is the thing that I keep coming around to. Like, we took from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and somehow we think we can discern them, but we really don't know, right? And so our heart is constantly divided to hope and fear, right? Whenever we choose completely blind. We just don't know. We hope, but we also fear, right? And I think gambling is the perfect example. You know, you put your money down on roulette or whatever, a number in roulette. I don't gamble, so I don't know how to do it, but you put your money down and you hope and fear, right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly, like, that's it stripped bare, right? That's what our life is like. Because and why? Because we don't know. And what was the canto before this? Was Lady
The
Fortune?
greedy? Was it the greedy?
Lady Fortune,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
Oh.
you have to.
I'm so sad I missed that one. That is one of my favorite.
I know. But like, this is the rain falling on the good and the evil, right? Like, this is like, we don't know, people. We don't know. And I think the only way that we make it is when we feel the sun shining on our faces. That's always the thing that I've had in my head. It's like, not only we don't just, it's not just right orientation, because we can think we're in the right orientation, but we might not be. We need to feel it. We need to feel the warmth of God's light in our faces. We need to be face to face, right? And moving in that direction. And the only thing we can know, and I say this all the time, is that God loves us and he's good, right? That's all we know. And I think that's all Christ knew in the garden.
Sherry, what's so wild is that contained in that statement is actually the cause of everything. Like, that statement is the final cause, or that's the highest cause of everything, is that God loves us. And the gap between that and the practical things is just a problem of specifics, and that's where the fear comes in. So
yeah, the deliberation, right? The choices that must be made.
Right. So the absurdity is that in the end we actually know. In the end, we know.
But see, the thing is that knowledge of that, Ted, allows us to let go of the weight that we're putting on our choices.
Yeah,
100%.
that's what
totally
Jesus
agree.
is talking about when he says,
I totally agree with you.
My yoke is easy and my burden is light, right?
Yes.
That's what Jesus says.
Yeah. Sherry, when you were talking about the sun, what immediately struck me was the Aaronic blessing, which, may the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. Yes. It's like, there you go. That's it. What else? That's exactly it.
Yeah. And when Moses is face to face, what happens to his face?
I can hear
reflects the divine light.
I can hear my son up and about, and he's going to expect me to feed him. Because we're alone this weekend. My wife went out of town for business. Keep the stream going by all means, though.
I should actually go.
Okay. Well,
in that case, it looks like we're going to be ending the stream. This was fun. I think. What do you think? You want to try it as a live stream again? I would like to have seen. It was nice to have the cameo by Graham, but it would be nice to have seen to get some other folks involved.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of good comments, and and honestly, Judaism has such a deep understanding of this.
Yes.
I wish
I all but begged Hezi to hop on the stream.
I know. It's okay. I'm just going to have to do my own research if he doesn't want to talk, and then I'll talk and he'll have to start. It's kind of like my grandmother used to say, if you want something done, if you want a man to do something for you, start it. And he'll just have to fix it. He won't be able to stand it. Right? He'll come in and say, just get started. I think my grandmother actually did that once. She wanted a kitchen. And so one day she just grabbed some boards and she was hammering away, and her husband came in. What are you doing?
Sure, you've got to stop sharing these secrets. It's not fair to the other women out there. They've got to stay secret.
Oh, well, you could be blessed with a husband like mine who's like, oh, she knows how to build a kitchen? Right on.
Amazing. Y'all have a wonderful Saturday.
Yeah,
Thanks
you
for the chat.
too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.